Hi, folks, and we're really delighted to have Gus Speth as our guest tonight on our community conversations. And I see a lot of familiar faces. It's good to see you all here. Gus goes back quite a way in the environmental movement, and I'm going to let him give a brief talk about what his views are these days. And then we hope that everybody will join in a conversation with him about the future of the climate issue and how we can go about getting this crisis resolved. So Gus, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I hope this is coming through loud and clear, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here with you, I have to say. Because I've certainly read you in the New York Times for a long time, and now you've won a prestigious award for your reporting at Inside Climate News, which I also read. So we're all lucky to have you. I hope everybody has had more rain and fewer black flies than I have had here in Strafford. I guess I want to talk about walking on 2 feet or 2 legs first, because I think that we do have to move with both to deal with this climate issue. On one, we have, well, now Biden and what he's proposing. And I want to comment on that. But in general, the first is to proceed with what's possible under the current circumstances and under the current political economy. The second thing I want to talk about is, well, how do we change the political economy? Because I will make the case that we'll never go far enough or fast enough unless we change the system in dealing with climate, and indeed a host of other issues. Now back to point one, what Biden? Well, I think I'll say some things that everybody, maybe almost everybody here has picked up on over the past few months. I know a number of the people he's appointed or have worked around or nearby with them. And they're great. This is an all-star cast to be dealing with the climate issue. And from young people, some of whom I've gotten to know, and old codgers like John Kerry, who's about my age. And and he set out some very powerful goals, which are probably not going to be enough over time, but a really good start. I mean, to talk about zero, to say our commitment is zero net emissions in the United States from all greenhouse gases, from all sources by 2050, and to say the same thing in terms of a 50% reduction, not 100%, by 2030. That's impressive, 50% and 100% clean power, electricity, by 2035. This is great. This is what we've been waiting on, the kind of leadership that we haven't had from another administration. And now, of course, they're in the business of formulating actions to get us there. And some of the actions are promises still. They have promised a clean power standard, which will insist on the electrical utilities sector moving towards the goals of 2030 and 2035. They have promised a new transportation regulation that will come out, at least proposed in July. And they are throwing a ton of money, as the expression goes, at the problem. They have given us, the U.S., a leg up on a start again, a restart, if you will, on international leadership, and eliciting commitments to go beyond the original Paris agreements, and from a host of countries, except China. And it's so, in many ways, they are off to a very good start. The problem, of course, is that spending is right now the focus of attention, because a lot of it is inside the infrastructure bill. And even earlier in the emergency COVID package, there was a lot about climate. And and we don't know what's going to happen, do we? I mean, we have a holdup right now while the negotiations, if we can call them that, seem to be going on. And we don't know what's going to be taken out in those negotiations, or what they will do after, if they ever reach agreement between the parties about what to do, and what they will do after that, in terms of going back and perhaps passing the left out material through a reconciliation process that doesn't require more than 50 votes. So all this is going on. We have to be happy, I think, with at least I am, with what Biden is proposing to do, and hope that he can find a political path to getting it done in this perfectly awful political system that we have. And it's not clear how long he has either, is it? Because we have another election right around the corner, with some new districts coming along, and a big swirl of politics, which we don't know how it's going to work out. Usually the party in power in the presidency loses congressional seats. Well, there are not many to lose, so anyhow, it's possible that they'll gain strength and gain an extra senator or two, and we'll be able to get even more done in the second 2 years of Biden's first term. Anyhow, that's sort of my take on walking on one leg. It's not unconventional at all. My other leg is perhaps more unconventional. I think it's maybe I could read a paragraph to you from something I've written, and it sort of sums up my view in a short order. The United States will never be able to go far enough or fast enough doing the right things on climate as long as our systemic priorities are ramping up GDP, growing corporate profits, increasing the incomes of the already well-to-do, neglecting the half of America that's just getting by, feeding our runaway consumerism, focusing almost exclusively on the near term, facilitating great bastions of corporate power, which are now the principal political actors as well as the principal economic actors, and helping abroad, only modestly or not at all. And that is those are features of our current political economy, and they war against effective action on the climate issue. They make progress very, very difficult, running up a very fast down escalator. And what we need is a system of political economy that's sufficiently changed that good results are the automatic or easy, routine results. Good results for people, good results for planet, good results for the places where we live. And that should be the easy result, natural occurrence as a part of a political economy that's different from the one that we have now. And So I want to mention some features of the difference, and you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. It's hard to embrace the idea of a new political economy in whole, so it's good to break it up. And so here's some features. One is that the market becomes a secondary force in economic life, and that cooperation and planning are the dominant forces. Profit becomes a secondary motivation, and businesses are focused and basically required through public review processes to be focused on the public good. We have moved beyond this GDP to different measures of welfare, and including the genuine progress indicator as an alternative, for example. In the investment area, investments are now almost exclusively made for high financial returns. In the new system, they would be made for high social and environmental returns. We, in the new system, right now we have a system that almost automatically produces inequality, growing inequality. And the new system would be geared to addressing those vast social deprivations that are so present and so difficult to work against today. In the new system, we'll be dealing with new values. The old values of materialism, contempocentrism, anthropocentrism will be replaced by a new focus on our place within nature and the more spiritual and value-laden propositions for a good life. We need a democratic transition, most obviously, I suppose, one that moves away from this creeping corporatocracy, plutocracy in our society to one that is truly democratic. Well, these are some of the areas of transition. You know, good news is that they seem like, oh, pie in the sky. But the truth is that there's a lot going on today in these areas. And indeed, there's a lot going on in Vermont, which in many ways at the forefront of a lot of these changes. Just to give you one example, Vermont is furthest in terms of the states in recognizing the genuine progress indicator as a measure of well-being rather than GDP, otherwise known as grossly distorted picture. There are measures being pursued that would increase worker ownership. Bernie's platform is full of proposals to do this and to increase the importance of co-ops in our society. There are measures underway to increase public banking. For example, California has passed a law that encourages and facilitates local communities to develop public banks in their communities. There's a movement to increase the presence of publicly owned utilities. I grew up with something that was, even in South Carolina, that was called gas and water socialism. And there's a movement now to increase public ownership and to revitalize the cooperative ownership, which has lost its link in a lot of these electric co-ops to the original structure of consumer management. Those are just some of the many things. And of course, there's a long list of areas of more personal to people and consumption things. Move your money out of Wall Street, adopt a more simple lifestyle, slow living, and a host of other behavioral changes that we need, getting away from shop till you drop. And so I don't think it's too ambitious to think about walking on that second leg. And that means that while we pursue the first set of issues I talked about, we need to also facilitate the introduction of changes in these other areas that I mentioned. They're not going to be adopted whole hog overnight, but we can begin to develop the alternative. And when crises increasingly hit, people will look around to see what's working, what's different, what's an alternative to what we have now. And so in a way, the big change will probably be crisis driven. People totally fed up with what's not working today and ready for something new. And hopefully there will be these functioning models across the landscape for people to look at. Well, Jack, that's enough from me. I would say that's an optimistic presentation. On the other hand, I can understand somebody might not see it that way, but I'm happy to throw
Gus,
it open.
What a broad spectrum of issues you've raised. I want to go back about 40 years when you were at the Council on Environmental Quality, and you wrote a report, I think it was 1980, called the Global 2000 Report. And you projected in that report for Jimmy Carter what the world would look like in 2000. And when you testified in Congress, I was at the hearing when you testified in Congress.
Goodness.
And you said, this is not a prediction. This is what happens if we go on the same course. And on that course that we were on in 1980, things were really turning out badly. And I wonder now, when you look back at the past 40 years, how do you see the progress that we've made? And how do you manage to say today, we still have a chance to solve this problem? We still have a chance to save the planet from the crisis of climate change?
Well, those are really big questions, right? I think what we were trying to do in this Global 2000 report was to open the door on a set of global scale issues. At that time, when we were preparing it in the late 70s and releasing it in 1980, as you say, all the focus in the US was on our domestic issues, air and water pollution, strip mining, clear cutting, dam building, highways, and so on. And what we were trying to point out there was that there were had emerged a set of global scale issues: the loss of biodiversity. We hit the climate issue hard, and loss of fisheries, soils and fertility around the world, water supplies. So there were these global scale issues that we called attention to. And there have been a number of studies that look at, well, were we right? There was one study that looked at whether we were right about what was going to happen in 2000. And there have been subsequent studies which, and it turns out that this so-called base case analysis that had these sort of dire projections in it for the year 2000, well, it turned out to be right. And that's another way of saying that we didn't really respond in the way that the report called for and hoped. And of course, it's not much better today. If you look at these global scale issues, there have been a lot of progress on US environmental issues, domestic things, and notably air and water pollution, which I might come back to in a sec, but and try to look at why we made progress there. But but on these global scale issues, you know, the deforestation is still huge out there. Desertification is still huge. Water supplies are, and now the climate issue is eclipsing and magnifying a host of other things globally. And so it's the one area where there's been real progress. Turned out to be a relatively simple problem, and that is the protection of the ozone, us really from ozone depletion. The ozone layer protection has definitely worked as and there's a moral there, which is it really it turned out that DuPont, the main maker of chlorofluorocarbons, the CFCs that were causing the problem at that time, found an alternative to the CFCs, and we're in the end happy to have the federal government ban, and other countries move against CFCs, and then they could sell their alternative product. And the story really is a comparison with climate, because the climate is like 1,000 times more complicated an issue. So anyhow, so we haven't, on those global scale issues that you mentioned, we haven't made much progress. In terms of, Jack, you used the phrase solve the problem, the climate issue. We're, I don't think, going to solve the climate issue in the sense that we've already brought huge changes, and the forward momentum of a lot of bad things going on, including the continued buildup of greenhouse gases, is not going to easily turn around. I mean, among other things, China just said that they would try to get their greenhouse gas growth to peak by 2030. So we have, we're going to reap, I'm afraid, some very terrible consequences here and abroad before we finally get this problem under control. And that's not a counsel of despair at all, because I think it could be a lot worse if we don't act impressively to deal with the issue. So it's a question of degrees of unfortunate, but we can certainly prevent the worst degrees of unfortunate.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about the children's trust litigation. This is for people who may not be familiar with it. Litigation in which a group of children say the United States government has a legal obligation to protect future generations from the damages of climate change. And when you wrote a brief on behalf of the plaintiffs, you laid out in a lot of detail the failures of our government over the past 20, 30, 40 years to address this problem when they knew that it was a problem. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how do we get our government to step up to its obligation to protect future generations or young children today, living today, from the damages of climate change?
Well, this is a remarkable lawsuit, I must say they had strong opposition from all 4 years of Trump, and have bounced around in the courts out in the Ninth Circuit and up to the Supreme Court a couple of times to try to get this to trial, really. The good news on the litigation is that just last week, the district judge out there directed the government and the plaintiffs to sit down and see if they could negotiate a settlement in this case. So and if not, she's going to consider whether to allow their amended complaint to go into effect, and that could easily lead to a start of a trial. So this litigation continues to go on. I was brought into the picture to do the history of the Carter administration, because that was really the central, the sort of axial point when the climate issue moved into government in a policy kind of way. And we had a president, Jimmy Carter, who recognized it as a serious concern for the first time. So I wrote up the Carter administration history, so to speak, and on the issue. And they said, well, now why don't you do all the other administrations? And I at first gagged, and then just took it upon myself to try to do the whole thing. So in the end, the report I did for them covered every administration from LBJ through early Trump. And I think could not have been done without a tremendous amount of documentary research that our Children's Trust, a really remarkable group, did to prepare itself, and in the end to prepare me for writing this report. So I had access to a remarkable amount of government information about each of these administrations.
Well, how do you explain, Gus, that the government over 30 or 40 years has completely failed to address this issue, which the science has been very clear about for a good long time?
Yeah, well, what I found in looking at all these administrations was that each administration had rather determinedly promoted fossil fuels. Whatever else they did, they promoted fossil fuel use in the United States. And in some cases, like the Obama administration, he had some plans and a good fuel efficiency standard and a good power plant plan and other things, but many of which Biden is now trying to revive. But he was so proud of all the fossil fuel development that he was also promoting simultaneously, including fracking. And so this is the story. They knew that each administration was presented, and I document this, with detailed scientific analysis on the problem, and each proceeded to not deal with it with the level of seriousness which it deserved, so I also point out that if we built on the foundation that Carter was building, we could have had a smooth, easy transition on the climate issue. But we neglected that, and starting with Reagan, we dealt very badly with the climate issue, and now we have a terrible situation on our hands with no time at all. And the reasons for this problem, of course, have to do with the immense power of money, of corporate power of the fossil fuel industry, and clearly, but it wasn't lack of a plan to deal with it. It wasn't like we were trapped, that we had to continue doing all of the destructive fossil fuel development because that we did do for some economic reason. Of course, there are economic things that have to be considered, but there was a path that each administration really had access to and was presented lots of information on to move to an alternative in a way that could be done economically acceptably.
Well, speaking of the power of the fossil fuel industry, I see my neighbors Paul and Wendy Manganiello have a question in our chat about Exxon and what's happening with Exxon these days. Paul, do you want to ask your question? You're on mute, Paul.
Sorry about that. Again, thank you very much for your presentation, Gus. The question I had asked, I had put in the chat was that today Exxon was dealt a little bit of a rebuke by their having two new board members, which were more environmentally aware, elected to their board of trustees, and I mean to the board. And basically, you had mentioned that we need to get away from Wall Street. But the question I wanted to ask was, rather than move away from Wall Street, shouldn't environmental organizations be more working towards kind of a friendly takeover of Wall Street by trying to kind of get them to change their position on environmental issues? And Rob Kidd was kind enough to send me a link to the Sierra Club, where it talks about reducing carbon imprint through investments. I haven't looked at it yet, but I'll be doing it, after this is over. But your thoughts about, rather than withdrawing, kind of like rather than pissing out of the tent, pissing into the tent, you might have a better, we need to be engaged with them and try to bring about change on their side.
Well, I think that's all to the good. And I was excited, as you seem to be as well, about the decision today by the Exxon shareholders to elect a bit of an alternative slate. And I think that the only way to view that is as a result of an immense amount of, one, education on the part of corporations, and two, pressure from the public. I mean, even the Rockefeller family has been campaigning for a long time now to make the I shouldn't say even the Rockefeller family. They've led this process of challenging Exxon
Right.
for years now, and there have been other prior shareholder efforts on Exxon, Chevron, and others. And these companies, they're now also facing pressure from their own sisters and brothers in the investment and finance community. It was notable that BlackRock, no small player, was in favor of electing these renegade board members, which that the board didn't want at Exxon, and so they were under a lot of pressure from other from the investment community. So there's been this sea change in the business community, and now with lots of companies, adopting different approaches to the climate issue. But I would, refer people who are interested in this to a website, called awkwardly, I think, with the name Say, S-A-Y, Say on Climate, Say on Climate. And check it out, because it's a vehicle for a lot of businesses to make commitments. So this is all to the good. This is, I think, part of that first walking on the first leg that I mentioned at the outset. I think it. And we've actually made a somewhat bolder proposal than, and there are ways of getting involved. For example, our good friend Bernie is now challenging the Biden proposal to spend billions on the support of the semiconductor industry. And one of his conditions that he wants to put on this federal support is that that the federal government, through some vehicle, take an equity interest in the companies. So there would be a public presence to ensure that the public spirit of this support is carried forward in action in the company. So there are a lot of ways to, there are other things that could be done. We're ending an era of boomer bosses. and a lot of turnover in corporate leadership. It's possible that that a lot of those boomer bosses will offer their employees an opportunity to, or a right of first refusal to buy the company. So we can also use, this. So these are what I call, in a way, I had not originally by any means, non-reformist reforms. They look like modest reforms, but they really contain the seeds of much deeper change. And so they are especially prized, I think, in this transitional period that we are in.
I
Well,
see a question
I'm sorry.
I see a question from Brenda in our chat, and I wonder, Brenda, are you there? Would you like to ask a question?
I am here, and I pretty much put it in the chat. I'm kind of just wondering what those of us just, wondering what can we do at an individual level? What might we expect coming down the line to help us, take better actions? So incentives, there's already some incentives for the government, some from the state, but I feel like there could be a lot more. And so I'm in this like, well, should I take action now, or should I wait in hopes that it might be a bigger incentive for doing things like adding a heat pump, et cetera?
Well, it's a very good point. There are different layers and levels of action. There's plenty that we each can do in our own lives. I like to think that here in this house, we have gone entirely renewable. Everything is electric, and all the electric is renewable. That's good, right? And it wasn't free, but at least we got there. There are lots of individual things that we can do, meatless days, and I think Vermont is a leader in these lifestyle changes. Goodness knows, I mean, this is the best state in the country for these efforts that individuals can make. I can't resist mentioning something which along these lines, which was that only have this data for 2016, the 2016 election when Trump won. But if only gun owners could have voted in the 2016 election, Trump would have carried every state but one, the brave little state of Vermont. So I think, there's a lot at that level. I think there's a lot that Vermont could do that we could get behind. That we could have a state bank in Vermont. We have a lot of state funds for individual purposes. They could be brought together, and we could enhance the funding for good purposes at low rates from a state bank. We could promote locally owned utilities. I think, honestly, I'd love to be an active owner of Green Mountain Power. And have that to be a democratically owned co-op or a publicly owned facility. It's lovely that Green Mountain Power has very high percentage of its power from non-fossil sources. And indeed, it's close to 100%, I think now. But very, very little of that is solar and wind, very little. It's almost all hydro coming in from Quebec, mostly, and nuclear coming in from New Hampshire. So, it's better than fossil, but they come at a particular cost. Anyhow, we could promote locally owned utilities in Vermont. I think there are a lot of these programs that we could do a lot more to help with equity and equality of opportunity in Vermont. There's still an awful lot of poverty and substandard housing and education and health opportunities, and groups in our region like Capstone and others need a lot of support. I think so. So there's a level of state action that we could get behind, and then at the federal level, we've really got to, I think, support some of the national groups that are really hard edged about this fight, and not only are and that are close enough to the process to make a difference. Because honestly, Biden can't fail. If we fail at this opportunity to get at least what he wants done, it's going to be tragic. And so, I could mention some groups that I think are really good at the national level, but I'm sure the Sierra Club is one of them. So anyhow, I hope that answers the question. I don't think there's any one thing, but whatever we need to do, we need to do urgently. And I think people act on this issue not so much because of incentives like discounts on electric vehicles and this kind of thing, but they act on it because they know that we're all in trouble if we don't.
That's very good advice, Gus. And I would reiterate that the Sierra Club is working very hard, and we welcome volunteers. We welcome people to come and get on board with the Sierra Club and help us get this message across to our local representatives. And these community conversations are a critical part of that. And so we're thankful that Gus is joining us for this. Gus, I want to ask you about the prospects for the Paris Climate Accord. Do you think that the world is on the right track for getting a grip on the climate crisis?
Well, I think the Earth Day meeting that Biden convened, which was a sort of, partly to reconfirm Paris and rejoin Paris, which we're doing, but also partly to help build up towards the new climate conference coming up in Glasgow. The climate meeting, let's see, when is it? It's it could be
November.
Later this year.
Yeah.
It could be late this year. And,
November.
Yeah, November. Thank you. And the Brits are hosting, and they it's going to be a huge event in terms of getting the world, on the moving further down the path. Biden got a lot of commitments on the Earth Day summit, and that was good to see, good to hear. But we have a long way to go. I mean, for the commitment that he's going to offer in Glasgow, it was like 50% of reductions by 2030. And the studies suggest that we should be closer to 70% reducing U.S. emissions by that time. I mean, you get a sense of how short this is for deep change that we should be making if we're going to do our fair share internationally. Biden also announced over this period, recent past, a host of international actions, mobilizing the international aid community and the trade community and others to act on climate. This is unprecedented, the scope of what's being attempted here. and we can only help and support them.
John Bartholomew, I see your hand raised. Have you got a question?
Yes, I was wondering if you could say just a little bit more about the state bank idea. Our treasurer, Beth Pierce, is very resistant to the idea. And when I've asked her, she's mentioned others. I don't think there are many states that have state banks. And she basically said if they tried to do it now, they wouldn't be able to, and provided a whole bunch of resources basically saying it can't work. So what kind of arguments can be used against her? Where is she misguided, and how might it work?
Well, it might be. I guess I'm aware a little. First, I am no expert on this issue, and the nearest I came to really getting involved was protesting in front of the TD Bank headquarters in Montpelier, and there it might be better, given the resistance there, to pick up on the California idea of a state law that would facilitate local communities. And there are not many in Vermont that are big enough to do this, but to facilitate local communities to undertake their own financial institutions. There are a host of financial institutions, including local banks and special purpose banks that could, in some of the larger communities in Vermont, make a go of it. There's encouragement that could be done to move investment locally. There's some things going on in that area already, like the White River Investment Group, and they're it's more symbolic, but they're local currency initiatives that could be pursued. So there's a way to get at this this investment issue other than a state directly on a state bank. If that road really is blocked, I wish I could give you 10 reasons why she's wrong, but I can't. I'm just not well enough informed. It sounds, I think it's South Dakota that has its state bank, but I haven't heard any compelling reasons why Vermont couldn't have one, and it has these functioning funds that are dedicated to various purposes, and certainly they could continue to operate under a state bank umbrella, but beats me.
Gus, your prescription includes a kind of an all-encompassing change of our social construct. Remove the power of the corporations. Is that realistic? I mean, I've gone to the mat against Exxon, and I tell you, that's a big corporation. They've got a lot of power, and the truth doesn't necessarily weigh on the scale against the monetary power of an Exxon corporation. So how do we go about this?
Well, Jack, I think you won a prize for exposing Exxon's duplicity, and good for you for doing that. And I think there are a lot of folks that are suing Exxon now for damages. They're suing Exxon. Exxon, could well be sued for. And I think maybe is being sued for misleading investors. It will come. There are things that can be done to challenge the dominance of corporations, and they're maybe particularly vulnerable in this area of money in politics. I think people really don't like that. and it's been a little bit muted lately, but it's a huge issue, and remains so, including dark money in politics. And so there are a lot of election reforms, including public financing of elections, which already have a good start in the country. So start with this idea of decoupling, undermining their foothold, their grip on American politics through money, and we can certainly pursue that issue and have public financing of elections, and that would make a huge difference. In the end, we might get to the point where we can talk about the separation of corporation and state. That if you're going to have a charter to operate to do business in the public interest in the country, you have to abide by certain political rules as well. So we got to start, and in some ways, these campaigns against corporations that we've been talking about are a start. But there's a whole different path too, and that's what I want to emphasize, which is it's one thing to challenge the giants. The giants are having their own problems, a lot of them, and I hope the social media giants are going to have huge problems. If you've seen that documentary, The Social Dilemma, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, you should see. Oh, there's the dog. You should see The Social Dilemma. Wow, what a powerful presentation from people in the industry. But the alternative is to build a different system from the ground up. These would inevitably be smaller units, but there's no reason that they need to stay small. The Mondragon Corporation in the Basque region in Spain has gotten to be quite an international player, and Vermont is I think has certainly more co-ops per capita than any state. It may have more co-ops per something else than any state. There's just a proliferation of publicly spirited businesses in the state of Vermont that could be encouraged and a model to promote this alternative system where you were talking about public-private hybrids, profit-for-profit hybrids, publicly owned enterprises, state development banks, local development funds. There's a whole ecosystem of alternative enterprise that socially directed companies and so on. The whole enterprise of alternative types of ecosystem of alternative types of enterprises that can be encouraged through various support programs. And Bernie's good at that. He's in terms of making some proposals and having some very good ideas in his 2020 platform.
You've mentioned Bernie several times, and I will remark that both Bernie Sanders and Senator Leahy are getting on in years, and we may have a couple of Senate seats open in Vermont in the next few years. Given that there's a 50-50 split in the Senate, the prospect of a Republican senator from Vermont might make a big difference. Do you think we're going to have a lively political season coming up here in Vermont?
Well, I certainly don't want such a thing. I wouldn't know enough to predict such a thing. As someone who's looking very closely at 80 in a few months, I don't want such. I want to think people just will keep going for the longest time.
Me too.
And it's but it would. Honestly, I'm no expert on Vermont politics, but I'd be very surprised if somehow the system elected a Republican to the Senate, but it's not impossible. We elect Republicans to the governorship, for example.
Gus, you've been around government for a long time. And over those years, I observed myself the deep partisan split that occurred on things that really shouldn't be partisan issues. You know, when science tells you what the truth is, there really shouldn't be a partisan issue about it. And I wonder if you think we're ever going to get back to the point where people like, oh, Sherry Bullard from New York, you know, a Republican who was the chairman of the science committee, where people who just want good government are going to be able to follow the science where it leads us. Do you see that coming?
Well, I don't see it immediately, that's for sure. You know, when I started in this area in 1970, when we created the Natural Resources Defense Council, if you look at the League of Conservation Voters chart at that time, you really find very little difference in the voting records of Republicans and Democrats on environment. Very little. But shortly thereafter, the difference began to spread. So we start out here with the two together, and over time, the Republicans developed to the point where it's hard to find a good environmental vote. And the Democrats evolved to the point where it's hard to find a bad environmental vote. And it's really quite, you know, amazing and also disturbing that that's the case. You know, in many ways, a lot of these issues should be Republican, Democrat issues. It should not be partisan. And indeed, that was the case when we had great environmental leaders on the Republican side, like Russell Train and Russell Peterson, for those who are old enough, and others. Howard Baker was important in working with Ed Muskie, and others. So it didn't have to be this way, but it evolved this way, and it's an interesting story of how it happened. But part of that story is told, for those of you who might be interested, by a wonderful, now deceased professor at MIT named Judith Laser, Layzer. And Laser wrote a book called Open for Business. And it is the story of the rise of Republican opposition to environment, and how that happened, and what forces drove it and fed it. But it's now dominant in the party.
Well, Gus, we want to thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. I'm going to let Rob Kidd close us out tonight. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate your work, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Well, thank you. Go Sox.
Thank you very much, Gus, for your remarks on that. So for those of you who don't are aware of it, we've been hosting these nearly weekly events since the beginning of the pandemic. So we have a couple more coming up. The Sierra Club is still going to be doing virtual events for the near future. We're also going to be, once we're given the go-ahead to do in-person events, we're going to try to figure out how to do in-person, but do a hybrid with the virtual. But I want to share the next couple conversations. Next week, we're going to have a discussion of the Vermont Climate Assessment with Leslie Ann Dupigny-Dureau, the Vermont State climatologist. And then on June 9th, we're going to be doing a discussion about 21st century uses for traditional tool biochar, and particularly relationship to what they're doing at Selborne Farms. And then on June 23rd, we just added this today, an ocean health and the environment. And there's a couple of people, I can't even remember who the exact people are who are doing that, but we'll have more promotional materials coming out soon. But any of our upcoming events are always posted on our website. And actually these conversations are posted about 24 to 48 hours later of the recording. So if you miss anyone, go to our website, and under community conversations is the tab for all the past conversations. And also our political talks are listed there too. So you can catch on one of the ones you missed. I shared in the chat some of the links to one of the other conversations. So we'll be having more conversations coming up. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, Gus, for joining us again. And that will be the ending of the program tonight.